welcome back to the next episode of Just Advisor Things. We are joined today with Jeni Daley. She is a former advisor, an amazing advisor. When I first started teaching, I was looking to her books for inspiration. They were so inspiring. And she since transitioned into a new career, but she has a lot of incredible wisdom to share, and we want to talk about technology. We also might have a couple of episodes because we have a lot of ideas when it comes to the world of advising and teaching journalism and teaching future employees of companies and all the skills that they can learn in a journalism classroom. But today we're going to start by talking about a workflow management, project management system. But before we get started, thank you so much, Jeni, for joining us. I'm so excited to chat with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I am happy and healthy, and it's foggy outside, but I got my Pantone color of the year on, so we're good.
Yes, peach fuzz. It's so cute. It looks great on you. Do you like the Pantone color of the year? There's been some negative attention on it.
I know everyone online is, they're a keyboard warrior about peach fuzz, but I'm very happy with it. I think it's fun and fresh, and we needed a change, so I like it.
I think it's cute.
I did too.
So tell us a little bit about your background, like how you got into teaching, advising, and like your experience there, and then where you're at now.
Yeah, so the short story is I actually started my career in marketing and enjoyed it, liked the work that I was doing, a lot of branding, that sort of thing. But I also really liked kids. And so I wanted to find some career that would kind of merge those interests together. And so I started teaching journalism at a high school. That was my undergrad degree, was in journalism and strategic communication. And so I did that for 8 years. And as I was, kind of deciding what my future was going to look like, I knew that I was probably going to either end up a principal at a school or choose a different career path, and had some friends in the world of technology really encourage me to consider educational technology. And so, all the edtech products that I was using in the classroom, I got really interested in. And as a journalism teacher, I knew that I had these transferable skills, right? Like,
for sure.
No shade to math teachers or, those more traditional content areas, but like journalism teachers are a different breed.
For sure.
It takes a different skill set. And so really started kind of exploring different career options in technology that I had never heard of. I thought it was just like, oh, you work for a tech company, you're a computer coder, which is not at all what is available. Like, that is very much one career, but there are people that only focus on data. There are project managers, there are product managers, there are front end, back end developers. Like, there's all of these positions. And so really kind of started building my skill set in product management, and then ended up accepting a position I work for a nonprofit educational technology company, and we provide test prep curriculum to schools throughout the country. And I am the product manager for that team now.
That's so cool. So can you tell us, just in case, I think a lot of people aren't really sure the difference. Project management is kind of in the name of what it is, but can you describe what is product management and maybe the differences of that?
Yeah, so project is a lot of times at like bigger companies, they're doing lots of different projects. Like, they've got all these teams working on different components. And so a project manager is kind of like a scheduler. Like, they're kind of given like, hey, here's the end goal, is we need this delivered by this date. And so the project manager's job is to organize everybody and to make sure like they've got the tools and resources they need, the schedule is aligned, they're checking in on progress, they're providing updates to upper management, that sort of thing. Product managers do a little bit of that. So I definitely still do project management, but there's more of like kind of a visionary component, and really like connecting with users and getting feedback and hearing like, well, what does our product need to better satisfy the user? We create roadmaps, which is like a much longer timeline of like, here's the outlook of the work. Lots of data informed decisions. And so it's more like, this is my baby, like, this is my product, and I'm gonna make sure that it's good now, but I'm gonna make sure it's great in the future. And so I really kind of organize the team and push the work forward and advocate for our customers, which sometimes, means going back to my team and being like, hey, the way we designed this isn't good. We got to fix it and change it. Whereas project is mostly just, like I said, like the scheduling part of that.
Right. Honestly, it sounds like the role of a yearbook editor. Like that's their baby and they have to advocate for the student body and make their team make it happen. I mean, that is a very applicable career, I feel like, for a yearbook student.
Yes, that exactly. And I think that was like my biggest light bulb moment. When I was teaching journalism, like I very clearly understood the fact that like none of my kids were going to go off and become like a writer for the New York Times. I think that's
Right.
a very antiquated idea to believe that, oh, these journalism kids will become professional journalists. And sure, we've all had like,
The
a lot
one.
of people, yeah, the one,
Yeah.
exactly. We've
Yeah.
had like the one, and we're so proud of them, and they're doing an amazing job, and they're an anchor at a local news station, whatever. That's awesome. But the thing that I really liked about journalism and why I felt like I was able to grow my staff was like helping them see the relevancy and the skills that they were learning in this class, and that it would apply to a lot of different careers. Another besides product management, another field or another career in tech or really anything is sales. And a lot of people are very like, ooh, I don't ever want to be a salesman. But like, man, there are so many sales positions and it's actually a very lucrative career.
Mhm.
And sales is really just about relationships and like working with people. And that's another thing that I think kids in quality journalism classes get a lot of experience doing. We all complained about like, oh, the group project when I was a kid,
Yeah,
right? And you're thinking of that group project in science, but the reality is like journalism is a group project for the whole
for
year.
sure. Hmm.
Yeah. And like that's developing the soft skills that kids actually need to be really successful in the careers. And so I think it was convicting to me that I was able to like talk through that with kids and help them see like, oh, you're going to develop these soft skills. But at the end of the day, like kids still need a little bit more concrete, like specifics about like, okay, so what does that soft skill, like exactly what job can I do with that
Hmm.
soft skill? And so when I started like personally exploring this career field, I just realized like I was unaware and kind of unprepared as a teacher. Like I could maybe name industries like, oh, you'll be great in business or
Or general technology, but it's like,
yes.
what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. And then, as I was kind of exploring becoming a product manager, I actually had one kid on my staff who was an editor that it was hard to like pinpoint like what made her like a step above the rest. And I finally figured it out when I saw product manager. I was like, Hannah, product
Here's your
management.
future.
Here's your future. It's great money wise. It's really wonderful opportunity. Like women in STEM, like product management is a great opportunity. And I was just like, she has that. She's got that game changer type of personality
Hmm.
that can communicate cross collaboratively. I mean, that's really like the thing that I think I love most is it's controlling kind of a product, right? But it's also like it's working with lots of different people. Like in technology, we call that working like cross collaboratively or cross
Hmm.
functionally. And really what it means is like, can you talk to people on the sales team and help them understand your product? Can you sit in a demo and sell it yourself? Can you
Hmm.
talk to customers and get feedback from them? Can you talk to, your boss and convince them why we should move in this direction? And I think that's what yearbook editors, newspaper editor, any editor
Well,
on a
journalism students, yeah.
yeah, right. Like maybe you started out by just like interviewing the quarterback of the football team, but then like by the time you're a senior and you're an editor, you may have had to deal with like a censorship issue where you're meeting with the principal and like that's upper management. So you're really learning like how to communicate to all of these different audiences, not just through your words, but like through actual communication, like face-to-face communication.
Mhm.
And I think that's the key skill that is going to propel them in the future.
Yeah, that is such a important thing that I think teachers need to realize it, not just in journalism classrooms, but in particular journalism teachers. I think that like you said, it's antiquated to think that all of our students are going to go into journalism, but even like the second wave of that was like marketing. And
Yeah.
there's just so many other things and skills that I thought it was so interesting when I started teaching. It was 2014 And I obviously went to college with a laptop computer, but these kids had grown up with phones in their hands and they couldn't even turn on a computer. And I was like, how are you going to make a yearbook? Because they're not used to it. They're used to typing like this. And it was just so interesting. I was like, wow, the technology skills have like this pendulum that like I took keyboarding in high school. It was required. I was like hating it, but it taught me how to type. And
Yes.
then now it's like the other way. Like it just, that technology skill is so important. And, it doesn't just mean you go into communications from journalism, in yearbook or in high school. So
But like on that note, like I think that was another kind of pitfall that I'm sure I fell into, is like when kids have a phone in their hands 24 hours a day, like we just assume they're tech savvy,
right.
and like what I found is like kids actually were really pretty terrible, like
They're like
file
Instagram
management.
savvy, but they're
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
tech savvy.
exactly.
Yeah.
But even like on Instagram, it's like they totally understood the vibe of Instagram with the pictures and like the filters
Mm-hmm.
and stuff, but they didn't understand like how to grow an audience on Instagram, or like
Community.
what how to write the
Mm-hmm.
caption, or like how to tag like the location or whatever. Like they didn't understand the algorithm and the math and right like behind it. And so I just saw like a lot of teachers being like, oh, well, I mean, they have a phone, they can figure it out because they have a phone. And I'm like, no, they
Right.
don't. They just are pretty limited in their scope. And so just like all of us, like they only know what they're exposed to. And so, if all they're exposed to is like just TikTok, sure, they are the experts in
Mm-hmm.
making a 30 to 60-second video. I agree with you. However, we're trying to expand that skill set. And so it's still our job to teach some of these like bigger technology or tech literacy skills, whatever I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
say. Like it's still our job to teach that because they still need direction.
Right. Which I think is also hard for a lot of, I'm having so many ideas, but hard for a lot of journalism teachers because they usually come from an art background or an English
Yeah.
background. They are not tech experts either, a lot of times. And so when we're told that it's our job to expand those skills, like you said, you went on a personal journey to learn these, product management skills, and then it brought itself into your classroom. I think that's another like thing that is daunting on the list of things for a journalism advisor. But it's a question I get a lot is like, I know we're supposed to be posting on social media. We're spending so much time and energy posting consistently, which is one problem. If they're not posting consistently, that's the first thing. But then they're like, but it's not working. And
Yeah.
it's that second part. It's not just posting something, it's what you're posting, how you're saying it, how you're building that community. And so there's two reasons behind it. It's not just to teach the skills, it's effective, for your publications. So,
Yeah, totally.
so many good points. Okay, so walk us through a little bit, like you said, like when you were advising, you kind of started looking into technology, and then before you actually left the classroom, you kind of started to implement it. So, what did
Yes.
that process look like? And maybe tell us like a little bit about the before and after of like the impacts that it made.
Sure. So I mentioned I taught for 8 years. So it made 8 yearbooks, 8 years worth of newspapers, whatever. And I always thought I was really good about being flexible and adapting to my staff's needs that particular year. And so I was always like learning new ideas from Organized Advisor or going to conferences or whatever. And so what that practically looked like in my classroom was most years, like I would do like slight shifts to my editor structure, right? Like I might add an editor position or take one away or change it. Like every time I learned something, I tried to change things. And so I would say like my last 3 years, I really started trying to focus more on the project management side of things, right? Like implementing Trello was a total game changer, and just, having cards. And that's actually a technology system, a project management system called Kanban or Kanban boards, which is like columns of work and moving it through. So I was like a little bit familiar with that. But as I started kind of exploring the world of tech from a professional side, I kept looking at these product management positions, and every single one said like must be trained in agile, must know Scrum methodology. And Agile and Scrum showed up everywhere.
And
And
you're like, what the heck are these words?
I had no idea. I mean, I was like a complete idiot. You know, I'm like, I'm applying for a job where like I could barely pronounce half of the requirements,
Or you're
right?
like, I'm agile, I'm
Yeah.
flexible. You're like, yeah.
I know. You just think to yourself, like, okay, it's like what is this an adjective? Is this I
Yeah.
don't even know like what category this like fits into. But every single job was requiring it. And so I started like, you know, kind of Googling it and trying to figure out like, why am I such an idiot? And I don't know what this is. And I came across like several resources explaining what it is. And essentially Scrum is one agile framework. So agile is kind of this like this umbrella. And the whole point was like back in the like late 1990s when software development like really started taking off, these developers who are building the software, you know, they were running into a lot of the same obstacles that journalism staffs do with like, okay, people aren't meeting deadlines and like, wait, we thought this was assigned to this guy and he thought somebody else was taking care of it. And, you know, all of those like logistical components of like, okay, well, we are supposed to submit 80 pages to our publisher and we are submitting 70 because, you know, 5 kids failed or whatever. And so those software developers were like, we got to change things up. Like we've got to have a framework that works for us. And so they created something called the Agile Manifesto, which is this like, you know, philosophy of work, whatever. And then they're like, okay, so this is a philosophy is we want to be agile in nature. You know, we don't want to like build an entire yearbook, for example, and then publish it and then get all this like critical feedback and be like, oh shoot, like if we would have
missed the mark. Yeah.
If we would have gotten the feedback earlier, like we could have fixed things. So things like that. And so so then they were like, well, let's come up with an actual like concrete structure that helps push the work along. And so Scrum is one of the frameworks. There's a couple of other ones, but Scrum is definitely the most popular one. And Scrum is actually a word that comes from rugby, which, you know, is not super popular in America, but a scrum in rugby is when like all of the team comes together literally and like interlocks and then pushes forward. Like that's a scrum. And so the whole idea of Scrum is put these practices in place that moves the work forward. And that really resonated with me because I'm like, you know, every deadline, we're trying to move that work forward in a significant way together. And so I kind of got behind like the philosophy, and then I started looking into, you know, well, what's the structure? And so there's some specific roles and there are some specific events with Scrum. So the specific roles is you have a product owner, and that's my job. And the product owner creates a backlog. A backlog is like, here's all the work to be done. And again, as I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, yeah, we do that in Yearbook, right? Like page 35, like needs to be done. Pictures of homecoming.
It's just really formalizing the process we're already doing.
Exactly. So I was like, okay, I kind of see product owner backlog. Got it. And then there's a Scrum Master, and the Scrum Master, and that's the actual term. Okay, I didn't come up with this. Scrum Master. My students thought that was hilarious. The Scrum Master's job is actually not to dictate how the work gets done. It's not to dictate the work to be done. The Scrum Master's job is just kind of like making sure that the work is getting done and coaching and facilitating and like, you know, if we got drama between two people, helping resolve that. And I was like, okay, that's a journalism teacher, right? Like you're trying really hard to like be hands-on while being hands-off, you know, like you're not designing the page, but you're trying to coach the kid to get the page done. And so that's a Scrum Master role. And then what I thought was kind of cool was then you just have this third category, which is kind of ambiguous, and it's just called developers. And in software, that looks like, you know, on my team, I have instructional designers, I have curriculum specialists, I have systems administrators that are a part of my team. But in journalism, I was like, well, that's photographers and writers, you know, and like designers. It's like you have these kids that have these specialties. But the point is that the development team, once they receive from the Scrum from the product owner, once they receive like the list of things to be done, then they can kind of decide how to do the work and which skill sets to tap into. And so even if you have a writer, a writer may say like, yeah, sure, I can take this article, but I also kind of want to try photography. And I know one of the tasks that we need to complete as a team is, to photograph this event happening on Friday night. And so I'll write the article because that's my expertise, but I'll tap into my other skill sets and I'll try this other thing. And so as long as the development team works together, that really helps. So anyway, so I read through all the structure of the roles and I was like, well, this is pretty easy to implement. And the roles are like the very bare minimum. So the roles, what they do is just changes the language. Okay.
Right.
Product owner, editor, Scrum master, journalism teacher, developer, anybody on staff. That's not, I think, what makes Scrum cool. What makes Scrum cool are the events that occur. And the way the events are structured, it really moves your staff in a direction of like, they self-manage. And so the way that I ended up doing it, because I wanted to try this out, like for my own personal skill set, but I also wanted to see if it worked with students, is I split them up into, I think I had like 4 development teams, so 4 Scrum teams. And each team had an editor. Each team, I still kind of played the Scrum master for all 4 teams. And then each team had typically writer, photographer, and a designer. And so the sprint is the time boxed event. Now, this is, you could argue like, oh, a sprint, that's just another word for a deadline. There is something that changed in my kids when I didn't call it a deadline. So a sprint has a very clear start date and a very clear end date. And there's clear parameters about in this sprint, we're going to get, this amount of work done. And sprints are typically, like in software development, they're usually 2 to 3 weeks. With like a school schedule that felt really tight for me. And so we ended up doing like first day of the month, last day of the month. And so with breaks and things like that, it would usually be between like 2.5 and 4 weeks long. You don't want your sprint to go beyond 4 weeks.
The whole point is like, it's a quick moving, like get this done and then get this done.
Yes, get this done and then move on to the next sprint. And so we had a sprint every single month. So basically 8 sprints for the year. And so the time boxing is one of the core components of Scrum, is like work doesn't go outside of the time box. If you commit to getting it done in that time box, it's got to get done. And so you start with a sprint planning meeting at the beginning of that sprint. So let's say that your sprint starts December 1st. Okay. So on December 1st in class, you would have a sprint planning meeting. And the product owner is really helping facilitate this. And the Scrum Master is just making sure like we get through it all. And so the product owner, they come and they say, okay, here's the goal for this sprint. This sprint, we think that we can get maybe like 10% of our pages designed. And so in order to do that, here's the list of tasks that need to be completed. And so my editors actually had to do quite a bit of work prior to the sprint planning meetings, where like they had to get the backlog established. They had to make sure like it was all prioritized. Like, okay, what is happening this next month? I don't care about 4 sprints down the road. I care about the work to be done today. And so they would get all of it organized and then they would present that to the team. But ultimately, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Ultimately, the team has to take ownership and say, yes, I'm willing to do this. So this is where I felt like it actually empowered my other staff members who could say, this is too much work for this sprint, or this is too little work for this sprint. And it took them a couple of sprints to like get to the sweet spot of knowing exactly how much work to assign. But it empowered those developers. And so it's really this like collaborative conversation to figure out, this is the work to be done. Each piece of work is a card. So in Trello, it's like, okay, if it's photographing one event, that's a card. If it's writing this story, that's a card. If it's designing, maybe you split up your pages and somebody designs the left and right, or however you do that, like those are each individual cards. And so then you've got to have some tool like Trello or something to visualize that work. Because in Scrum, you typically have 3 columns. There's to do, doing, and done. And so you move these cards through the columns to say like, okay, as soon as we commit to doing work, we're going to pull it into the doing column so that we can see how much is left on the full backlog. And then as you go throughout the year, your backlog gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter because you have less stuff to do. And so, so the sprint planning meeting is really, really critical. Then throughout the sprint, every single day, and this is so simple, but this is probably the thing that I think worked the best for my staff, is you have what's called a daily stand-up or a daily scrum. And this is where your team literally stand up. I know that's silly, but that's part of it. Is like people sitting down will talk longer.
It's
people
an active posture. Like it's something that you want to be moving away from. So
yes.
it's helpful.
The other thing that I noticed is like when you do a daily stand-up, there's something about their body movements that the kids really learn better, like public speaking skills, honestly.
Yeah, for sure.
So the daily stand-up would occur and every single kid in the circle has to answer 3 things. Number 1, what did you do yesterday? 2, what are you doing today? And 3, do you have any impediments or obstacles? And really what this did was this, like, it was like a 5-minute meeting usually, but it was this accountability piece, right? When a kid knows like they've got to walk into class and they can't just hide under the radar, like they have to say out loud what they worked on yesterday. And if they showed up and shopped for prom dresses, they got to say that, right? And then people know like, oh, well, when you don't meet the sprint deadline, then maybe it's because you're shopping for prom dresses.
Right.
And so like that was a huge shift. And it also, this is strange, but actually I think held my editors more accountable than anybody. Because sometimes your editors fall into that trap of like, I'm just really good at procrastinating and like doing it really fast at the end. And it's like, well, you should have used your time better earlier to get quality work. So the daily sprint is like very critical. You can't skip it. Like even when I was absent, I would leave sub plans and say like, they must do a daily stand-up. And my editors knew like I was going to ask about it when I got back. The other thing that does is like, it helps kids to communicate early if they're running into an obstacle. So sometimes what I would find is like brand new photographers, a lot of times, you know, they would take amazing photos, things would be going really well. And then they get them uploaded and they would forget a step. Like, well, how do I add the watermark? Like, I don't remember how to do that stuff. And because they're, you know, a sophomore and their editor is a senior, it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
But in a group where it's like, maybe there are other sophomores in their scrum group, they would just say out loud, one impediment I'm facing is this. And then it's like the rest of the team needs to respond to that impediment and say, oh, I can help you. I like remember how to do that. Right. And so it really helped with like developing leadership skills, not just with the editors, but with everybody, because people would often like want to help their development team or their scrum team. Okay, this is a lot. Keep going. So you have the daily stand-ups, and then at the end, you have 2 additional events. So you do the daily stand-up every single day, 5 minutes a day for, you know, 3-4 weeks. But at the end, you always have a clear review day. So the review day would typically be like the second to last day of the sprint. So in the sprint review, your job is everybody is supposed to show the work that they did. So again, it's an accountability piece, but it's also really cool to see and to honor the work of everyone on the team. And so like on my current scrum team, like we have a sprint review day. It's usually like 2 to 3 hours, but we get, as adults, you know, we're getting a ton of work done, and it's super cool because my whole team, it's like, okay, Jeni, your turn to share your screen. And so I'll share my screen and be like, I worked on this. I worked on this. This was the decision I made here. And people ask me questions and learn from me. And then when they share their screen, I'm like, oh, I never thought to do the work that way. Like that was really cool, you know? And so that might inspire creativity in your kids for the next sprint. So maybe like a designer shows like, oh, well, I made this little, you know, module on this one. That's what I was thinking. And then the kids are like, oh, that's genius, you know?
Right.
And sometimes people don't, it's weird, but like in the yearbook process, you're just like shuffling pages to finish.
Those kids never see the other kids' pages. And at the end of the year, they're like, oh, wow, I would have put this on my page.
Yes. So. Yeah. So the sprint review is super cool in that manner of like sharing the work. And it's a great chance for your editors to really call out good work that they see. And then besides the daily stand-up, I said that was like really critical to my staff. The other thing that I think really is worth advocating for is the end of the sprint. The last final thing is called a sprint retrospective, or sprint retro for short. And the sprint retrospective is another formalized meeting. And what I would do is I would have my students like either like in a Google form or like some digital assignment. They would have to do some prep work for that. And the prep work would be, what did I do well and what can I improve? And then what did the team do well and what can the team improve? And the whole point of a retrospective is to then have a conversation about, this did not work this time, but we're about to start a sprint tomorrow. What's something we can change between today and tomorrow to fix the next round? And that was really cool because I think that empowered the kids to feel like, okay, this is something we can do immediately, rather than like, sometimes my kids would fall into these traps where like the juniors would be like,
well, next year,
this year sucks, right? Because of like XYZ. And next year when I'm the editor, I'm going to change things up. And it's like, that's true. And that's good. And everybody should have that opportunity. But what if like you could implement those changes earlier?
Right.
Like,
Wait. Yeah.
Yeah. Why wait? Like, just fix it now before, we move forward. And so like some of the things are like, okay, if we don't like our uploading procedures for photos, okay, change it. Like one of the things that I think my students changed was like, they realized early on, like how we were posting on social media, like there was this weird conflict where it's like the photographers were taking the pictures and posting them on their personal photography accounts and then tagging our journalism account. And it was like, that felt weird. And someone else tried a different, and it was like, okay, then fix it. So they established some policies and they said, okay, here's like 5 steps. Let's follow these. And then the rest of the year, it was super cool to see like our social media presence grew because we made this one shift, at the end of October. And then the rest of the year was so much better. So I think that's a huge component too, is like having dedicated space to reflect and to celebrate. And these are all like concepts that feel really basic. Like even talking about it now, I'm like, that was what I was doing before. Like we would have a party day, we would celebrate the deadline, bring food, right? Like everybody does that. I'm telling you, like it was a different shift when we went to Scrum. And I was mostly mad that I didn't do it earlier.
Right. Well, I mean, human psychology tells us that we thrive with structure. So we want that freedom, but formalizing it allows us to like really utilize it more.
Yeah, exactly. And my kids just had fun with it. And like I said, like kind of going back to my initial thoughts, like the thing that it did for my kids was it helped them to see like, oh, I could go into sales. I could go and be a product manager. Like I think they maybe unintentionally like realized, oh, I'm actually exploring a real career field. And so then because of that, like they took even more ownership of it and like really wanted to do it right. And so there was a level of self-management that I had not experienced before. And it really got to the point like very quickly, I would say like within 2 sprints, that like I was not touching the Trello board. I was not having to direct and initiate with my editors, like, this is upcoming, don't forget. And they started like just taking it on themselves. And it got to the point where it was like, this is kind of the dream, right? It's like, I'm very hands off, which is hard for journalism teachers, but like, they just were doing it so flawlessly. And it's truly just like a month of structure. And I spent quite a bit of time training them on the front end. But within a couple months, it was like bing, bang, boom. They knew what they were doing.
I love it. It sounds like the dream, truly. Like it sounds like there's a lot of visibility into everyone else's work and to the overall project, which a lot of times as a new staff member, you don't get that. It also like ensures accountability. Like you have a team to answer to, and it's not just you as the teacher to the student. And I think that, so I heard about Scrum when I quit teaching, actually, because I have done web design ever since college, but I've done it just like willy-nilly. Like I can design, I can do the, WordPress websites. And so when I became a full-time freelancer, I was looking for more of a formulaic system to build websites. And so I came across all this kind of very similar to your journey. And I had the exact same thought, like, I wish that I knew this when I was teaching. And then I saw that you were doing it and I was like, oh, good, this is amazing. I want to know how it's going. And I mean, it sounds like it's just the perfect application of skills that these students are going to need in the workforce, like project management tools like Trello, using
Yeah.
the Kanban boards, as well as the Scrum framework. In addition to, even if they go become a rocket scientist, which they might use Scrum too, like,
Yeah.
they are learning those skills that I'll be applicable regardless, but they will be, it's going to make the process so much easier and
Yeah,
just
for sure.
more efficient.
And like what you said about like the technology tools themselves, like, a lot of staffs are familiar with Trello, but, professional product teams are even going beyond that. Now, a lot of the software is expensive, but some of it, you can get free still. So like Trello is a great visual board, but like Jira is actually what a lot of product teams use. And that's also owned by Atlassian. That's the parent company. And Jira, I think schools might be able to tap into that for free. There's Asana. We use Craft.io, which is not cheap, so don't buy that, but it's amazing. Like, it's not just the visual, it's like it combines spreadsheets. Their Smart Sheet is another one. Like, it really kind of, I think, helped my staff to look into and explore like what's the best tool for us to like manage this work, because you've got to have like a central hub of all of the details and like documentation. And so I think like even that's a great activity for your editors, like over the summer, to explore like which tool you want to use to do the work.
Right. Yeah. I actually last year introduced a couple of advisors to ClickUp because that's what I use personally. And I think it's so good. But the pricing point is it didn't work out. So I think that there are better options for education. I wish that these project management companies would recognize the value in training these younger kids in these software, because they can also be product advocates later down the road where they go and work. But
I like tagged them on a little bit of a salty like LinkedIn post one time where I was like, why are you not offering this for free for high schoolers? And a lot of them, it's weird, like they offer it for free for college students because of that same thing. Like they know, okay, these business kids are like getting their MBAs or whatever, and we know they're about to enter the workforce. And when they are in that seat, we want them to choose ClickUp or Asana or whatever, or Monday.com was another cool one.
Yeah.
And so they give it to college students for free, but they didn't give it to high schoolers for free. So,
which seems so silly, but I think it's just like a lack of knowledge about it. Like they don't think that the like high school kids have a project like Yearbook or newspaper that is applicable. So I've actually talked to a couple of them about it, and it's very difficult for them to understand and like get. But I'm pushing for it, because if I can get at least one of them to come on, I would love to get advisors into using software like that to really implement some level of project management with a tool. Because I think that, even if you can't maybe do the whole Scrum framework from the beginning, bits and pieces of it are still going to be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And the other thing I'll pitch is like, there are so many free resources on Scrum online. Like, I think I kind of went into it assuming like I would have to get certification. And, now that I'm a product manager, my company paid for me to get like the formal certification. But what was kind of cool is I realized like going through my formal training, I'm like, I actually was able to get enough training through the free resources that I didn't have to do the formal stuff. It's great to have now, but like there's so many articles, there are videos. I actually saw a couple of videos this week about like a couple of schools in Arizona implementing Scrum in all of their classrooms. Like, I know. And I was like, oh, that's a game changer. So just know like the resources are out there, and I'm happy to kind of guide and provide some of those.
Yes, if you could send me a couple links, I'll drop them in the description box below so people can at least have a place of where to start. But honestly, I think you gave such a good description of the framework, and it is one of those things. It's agile, like it's flexible, like you can make it work for your particular staff. I know a lot of staffs are structured in all kinds of different ways, which is a challenge we run into when answering questions about how to structure, how to, organize your staff, how to figure out what editors you need. But this is a framework that is, applicable in a lot of situations.
Well, the other thing that I noticed is like, when I started, my staff, it wasn't huge, so I know a lot of people, especially at smaller schools or with smaller staffs, are like looking for resources, and it's like, oh, here's another resource, but it's like
Mhm.
a mega school in Texas, with like a
Right.
huge staff. And what was cool about Scrum is like a Scrum team is actually supposed to be no more than 10. And
Mhm.
so that's why I split my staff up into multiple Scrum teams. And so it's very scalable. And that's why I think it's taken on so much in the world of technology, is like, if you're at a startup, your team's actually super small. It can be like as tiny as like 5 people. Whereas if you work for Meta or Amazon or any of the, they call them FANG companies, then obviously like you've got thousands of employees, and Scrum still works. So it can work for a startup or it can work for a mega corporation.
Right. And it seems like their students really bought into it. Like they loved the structure and
Yeah. I think at first it was kind of a joke, right? Like
like
part of the
Scrum Master.
yes. I mean, I was like scrummy scrum, they
Yeah.
would come in like hot every day, like kind of making fun of me, like Scrum Master Daley said we
Yeah.
must do this. But like I said, like within a couple of weeks, I was like, wait a second.
You like
I was on
it?
one day and you were like, we must do the daily stand up, so I called them out on that. And I brought in a friend of mine, like connected me to a professional product owner who came in, and he talked to my editors and showed them like, here's our burn down chart, here's our story points, like you can go far with Scrum, like
Mhm.
very technical. And he just talked about like, okay, you guys are doing this mini version of it, that's awesome. Now when you enter the job field someday, here's what it will look like. And I think just seeing like, oh, this, like, she's not just lying to us, this actually
Right.
is a real thing, like that I can get a job using. I think that is why they took ownership of it. And I showed them, I was like, guys, here's 50 job postings that
Mhm.
mention agile scrum. And they were like, okay,
Oh, cool.
that
Yeah.
seems cool. So
And I mean, like you said, it's a very lucrative career, product management, project
yeah.
management. I mean, I think that with COVID taught us anything, like this digital landscape that we have is only going to get bigger. And like these project management roles really weren't as robust and as needed, or maybe they were as needed, but they weren't as popular as they are now. And so
Yeah.
there's quite a bit of money to be made in this type of skill. And, it's, and like you said, it's cross applicable. So you were in marketing and then in teaching and now in this, and the skills are needed in all of those departments. So,
Well, and honestly, like I think part of what makes it a more lucrative career is like, technology, number one, has the money. They've got the
mhm.
funding. And every district, just in education technology, for example, like every district, like everybody went digital either before COVID or they were forced into it during COVID. And so it's rapidly expanding, and it's actually it's super competitive. Like the market has tightened up quite a bit. And yeah, I think like sometimes it's easy to not really understand an industry when like all you're getting are these like bits and pieces from the media. And I think what a lot of people are seeing right now is like all these layoffs in tech. And, that can be scary. Don't get me wrong, like, especially working for a tech company, but the layoffs are coming after like explosive growth
Mhm.
during COVID. And so like Spotify, for example, they announced, layoffs this week, another round, but it's like, okay,
It's
Spotify was here,
yeah.
right? And then when COVID hit, they overhired.
Mhm.
And because it was like, oh, all these people want digital, we have this influx of money, blah, blah, blah. So they went from like here to here. And now they're like, okay, we need to self-correct a little bit, but we're still here. So it's like
Right.
from pre-COVID to now, there's still been growth, but all people see is layoffs. And I think the same thing is true with ed tech companies. There was an influx of money. Many people in schools are aware of ESSER funds. That was kind of the support money given to schools to try and get them through the pandemic. And there's some fears right now, like those ESSER funds are about to expire, and so people are like, oh no, ed tech companies are going away. That's not true. They're just
No.
to build better products and compete a little bit more.
Right.
But the industry itself is really stable. Digital stuff is not going away. This is not something that's going to expire. The AI boom right now is like unbelievable. There will be
Mhm.
even even more opportunities. That's the thing, is people, I think, are really scared that AI is going to remove jobs. And I'll tell you, I use AI on a daily basis.
Me
It's not removing that job.
too.
It's
Mhm.
making me way faster and way more efficient. And it's making what I can create even better. And
Right.
so,
Because your brain space isn't taken up on the menial things. You're able to take that and then be more creative with it.
yes, yes. Now, we, journalism teachers should be teaching their students how to use
Right.
AI. I firmly believe that. That's a whole
Right.
nother podcast. But
Ethically and not
yeah,
to cheat. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look at, I think it was Sports Illustrated, like they just got caught up in some big scandal because they found out like, oh, half your articles are written by AI chatbots, and you
Right.
even use like an AI profile to build their picture. Cool, love it. Don't do that.
Yeah.
But, I think like using something simple like ChatGPT to like get ideas off the ground and using it as
Mhm.
a brainstorming partner is what a lot of people in tech are doing, and a lot of student editors should be doing as well.
Right. I totally agree. I think that educators in general are very scared of it because it is hard to catch. I think that
Yeah.
it's getting harder and harder. Like in the beginning, it was like, oh, well, clearly you're not this articulate. Like these words are convoluted and you can tell. But now my husband just sent me an article this morning of a girl that is completely AI generated, and she's an Instagram influencer, but it's come out now that she is completely some, I don't know, tech wizard behind the scenes
Yeah.
and making like $10,000 a month in like sponsored ads and stuff. And I'm like, I'm doing it. Like I'm gonna go figure out how to do that. So
Oh
it's
my.
just crazy. But there's always going to be a need for people to take that data and use it in other ways and like actually create and stuff like that. So I think it's a really exciting time to get into tech. So
It is. It is
yeah.
really exciting.
Cool. Well, we definitely have more to talk about. We're going to talk about all of these other tech related skills that students need that you can absolutely teach in your classroom, even if you're not super tech savvy. I think it's important to educate yourself so you can then better educate your students, but it's something you can do over time. So we'll definitely have another episode soon. But thank you so much for just explaining. I think you did such a good job of explaining the framework overall. I'm going to put together a little document that's like a downloadable so people have a little bit of a guide, so they can review that as they implement it. But if you guys have any questions, drop them in the comments below and we'll try and get you the answers so you can implement this in your classroom if you want to, because I think it's super helpful. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
Super fun. Thanks so much for having me, Katie. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.